In this video, we'll look at your options under the Interface tab in the Lightroom Preferences. The Preferences dialog is available on a Mac by selecting Lightroom, Preferences, and on a PC, it's Edit and then Preferences. Many of Lightroom Preferences are performance-based options, but here in the Interface tab, the preferences are more aesthetic and based on personal preference. So under Panels, End Marks, Small Flourish is chosen by default. And in previous versions of Lightroom, you could choose different end marks that show up down here at the end of the panels. This is the left panel, and down here at the end of the right panel. Now it's shipping just with the small flourish end mark for Lightroom 5. However, you can always go to the panel end marks folder here and place your own graphic that you can use for an end mark. Over to the right, we can select font size. Right now it's set for small, which is the default setting, or large. Now this is going to affect the text that you see over here in the right and left hand panel. So if this is just too small for you, what you see there, you can enlarge it by selecting large. It will show up after you've quit Lightroom and restarted. Okay, as far as lights out go, right now the screen color is set to black. And let me leave the preferences just to remind you how lights out works. If I hit the L key, you can see how it goes dim and then completely dark and then back by cycling through the L key. But under the preferences, we can change that to, let's say, a dark gray. Let me go over here now and show you what happens. Lights out, that's going to be gray, dark gray, and then back. I'm going to go ahead and keep this at black. That just works better for me. And you can also select a dim level. Let me show you what happens when you do that. I can make the dim level 50% instead of 80%. And you can see that's much less dimming than earlier. And then back. These are just aesthetic choices. It's really up to you. I'm going to go ahead and keep the default on both the screen color and the dim level. Okay, as far as background goes, let me try to move this over a little bit so you can see how this works. You can change the background color from white to light gray to medium gray, dark gray, black. Let me show you what happens when you do that. The default is medium gray for a reason, and I'm going to keep it there. That's just, I like seeing my pictures against a neutral gray background, but you can change that right there if you want. As far as texture goes, you can go from no texture to pinstripes. Again, that's a personal preference, just the way you want to look at your images against the background. And the secondary window, with Lightroom down here, you can run a second monitor. Down here in the toolbar, you can see, but that's obviously dependent on having the second monitor. And if you have that set up, this secondary window will control the fill color there and the texture as well. All right, so keyword entry, separate keywords using commas. This is the most common way of separating keywords. You can also separate keywords using spaces. I'm not going to recommend that because, frankly, I do sometimes have keywords that are not just one word, but a phrase. It may be this person and that person, or this mountain and that river. So I sometimes will have multiple words separated by spaces, but if I've selected spaces here, it'll treat each one separately, each word separately, rather than the phrase. So commas is the more traditional way of separating keywords. I would just keep that at commas. And autocomplete text in the keyword tag field, that's over here when you're in the, let me go over to the right panel in the library module. When you're typing in a keyword here, if you've typed in a previously used keyword, it will automatically fill that in for you. That can be handy, and it can actually speed up your workflow. So that's selected by default, but you can also turn that off if you want. So under the film strip options, let me go ahead and let me enlarge the film strip a little bit so we can see things better. Okay, and now open up preferences again. And under the film strip, we can control what is showing up in the thumbnail. Right now, everything's selected, which is, I find, useful because this gives me a lot of information. It's going to show the ratings and pics. Here's the rating down here for this picture, if it has a rating. It's going to show the various badges that tell me that this has been worked on in the develop module. It's been cropped. It gives me all kinds of information with those badges. If it's a part of a stack, it will show the stack count, how many images are in a particular stack. If you deselect that, you won't have that number available. So I really think most of these options should be turned on or are selected as they are. Show photos in the navigator. On mouse over, that's how this works over here. You don't have to select this image in the film strip. You just move your mouse over it and it'll show up here in the navigator. I like to have that on, but you may prefer to turn that off. And show photo info tooltips. With that selected, when I move my cursor over a thumbnail, it will give me all this information that you see there. So again, that's a personal preference. If you like to have that information show up when you move your cursor over a thumbnail. Now under tweaks, zoom, click point to center is chosen by default. And how that works is that when you have selected an image, let me go ahead and shrink this film strip down a little bit. We don't need it to be that big. Right now, when I click, let's say on this point over here, it's going to center it, as opposed to if I don't select the zoom click to center, it will not center it automatically. It'll zoom up, but it won't put it into the center of my preview window. I kind of like it going right to the center. So I keep that selected. Personal preference, up to you. Now what you see here with the typographical fractions, I think that's only an option if you're working with a Mac. And what that does, right now it's set to use typographical fractions. And you can see up here, this is a fraction 0.4 seconds for my shutter speed. I can deselect this and it will then show it not as a typographical fraction, but as a numerical fraction. So this is personal preference right there. And again, that's only on the Mac. So as I've said several times, the options found under the Interface tab are really mostly aesthetic, like all aesthetic decisions. But it's a good idea to take a little time and personalize Lightroom so it meets your own taste.